Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to Feroot's Expert Webinar Series. In today's webinar, we are very excited to have Dr. Anne Cavoukian with us, and we're going to be discussing how to integrate privacy into your business strategy and product. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Lori Smith. I'm the webinar host today, and on technical support, managing our Q&A and chat is Sandra Fang. So if you're having any sound issues or questions, we encourage you to use that bar along the bottom where you can raise your hand or ask us any questions throughout the presentation. So maybe let's just test that out right now. Try to raise your hand quickly if you can hear me okay. Great, I see lots of raised hands. Fantastic. And any raised hands for anyone who attended our summit in September where we had Anne speak? Was anyone there who's now on the webinar? Oh, perfect. Great, thank you. Thanks for joining us again. Okay, so our agenda today is super ambitious, so get ready to settle in and learn a lot. And we're hoping you can stay until the very end because what we've done, all those challenges you put into the registration, there were a lot of similarities, and we've turned those into 3 major themes, and we're going to answer those specifically. So that'll be at the end. Okay, and now I would like to introduce our speakers. So again, very honored to have Dr. Anne Cavoukian with us. Dr. Cavoukian is recognized as one of the world's leading privacy experts and served an unprecedented 3 terms as the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Canada. It was there that Anne created Privacy by Design, which has since been recognized as an international standard and translated into 40 different languages across the world. Presently, Anne is the Distinguished Expert in Residence, leading the Privacy by Design Center of Excellence at Ryerson University. So thank you, Anne. And also joining Anne is our very own Ivan Tsarynny. For the last few years, Ivan has centered his path on helping companies turn privacy compliance from a liability into a competitive advantage. He's also a member of the GDPR Advisory Committee at the Standard Council of Canada, where he's dedicated to helping companies and organizations build a cohesive standard for privacy management. And he's also the CEO and co-founder of Feroot Privacy, an enterprise privacy as a software service. So Anne, Ivan, welcome. And we're going to unmute you now. Oh, okay, I'm going to unmute. Here we go. Unmuting you and giving you control. So Anne, you now have control of the screen. Perfect. Take it away, Anne.
All right. Thank you, Lori. Hello to everyone. It's a pleasure speaking to you today, and I'm just very excited to be doing this. And as you know, and I did not advance that, so it moved too quickly. I always start by wanting to dispel the myths associated with privacy. And the first one is that privacy is equal to secrecy. It's about having something to hide. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's what I want you to know. Privacy is all about control. It's about personal control relating to the uses of your personal information. Lori, I'm trying to advance the screen and I am not succeeding. So,
okay, you can just
there.
Click.
Okay, now I'm going to click. Privacy is about control. That's what I was saying. It's all about personal control, and you are the only one who should be able to make that decision. Lori, sorry, forgive me. Once again, my arrow's not working. And is it just a delayed thing? I'm just trying to understand because I go through these very quickly.
That's okay. Just try clicking, use an actual click, and that should get your arrows working again.
Okay, let me see if I can do this. Privacy is all about personal control on the part of the data subject. You have to have freedom of choice to make the decisions on how to use your information, to whom you wish to have it disclosed. And I always like to reference the Germans, their wonderful term of informational self-determination, which they thought was such an important value. They enshrined it as a right in their constitution in 1983. And you know, it's no accident that Germany is a leading privacy and data protection country in the world. It's no accident they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich and the complete cessation of all of their privacy and all of their freedom. And when that ended, they said, never again will we allow the state to rob us of our privacy and our freedom. And they've stood by that. During my 3 terms as commissioner, I went to many conferences in Germany. Every conference was started with a reference back to that time. And you see, one of the reasons it's so important that the individual retains control is because context is key. What may be sensitive to you may not be sensitive to me or someone else. So we will make different decisions as to what information we wish to disclose to others. It's all about the context associated with the data, and only the individual, the data subject, is aware of that context and can make that decision. I also always like to point out that privacy forms the heart of our freedoms. It's the foundation of free and open societies. You cannot have societal prosperity and well-being without privacy. Innovation, creativity, privacy breeds these, and the resultant prosperity that societies require to be free and open societies. It's essential to freedom. Surveillance is the antithesis of privacy. It's the exact opposite. It's a negative consequence. I always talk about the usurpation of your limited cognitive bandwidth. It shrinks your cognitive bandwidth, and I'm sorry, I'm a psychologist, I speak in those terms. It makes you go inward. It's the opposite of blue sky thinking. You go more and more within yourself. You don't come up with the brilliant ideas that allow you to come up with the brilliant creations that we need. And in order to do that, you have to be free to think wildly and creatively without any restrictions on your privacy. I'm going to talk to you about privacy by design, and I call it the decade of privacy by design, because in 2010, so let me explain what privacy commissioners do. Once a year, we have an international privacy commissioners conference, a data protection conference, and it's usually in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem, and at the end of a 3 or 4 day session, we have a half-day closed session where commissioners are allowed to advance resolutions that the entire assembly of commissioners votes on. And in 2010, I advanced the resolution that we need to have privacy protected proactively by design, not only as regulatory compliance after the fact. I wanted a preventative model, much like a medical model of prevention, where we could address the privacy harms up front, anticipate them, build in the much needed protections, and prevent the harms from arising. And I was delighted that my request was unanimously passed. But I was also surprised because, you know, I always say most commissioners are lawyers. They love drilling down into section 29, sub 2, part A, and applying the law to the fact situation, getting an outcome, a resolution. The problem with that is, and this is what I realized we all realized, that in this day and age of ubiquitous computing, massive online connectivity, social media abounding, we were only seeing, as commissioners, the tip of the iceberg. The majority of the harms were remaining largely unchallenged, unknown, unregulated. And that was unacceptable to all of the commissioners. So that's why we felt that regulatory compliance after the fact was no longer sustainable as the sole model of ensuring the future of privacy. And we have had such great success with this. It's just been amazing. It's been translated into 40 languages, and not a week would go by when I was commissioner where I wouldn't hear from some different jurisdiction around the world telling me what they were doing in this area. So what I'd love you to do is spread the word. Tell others within your organization, outside of the organization, how vitally important it is to get proactive and ahead of the problems. You need, in order to do that, the two essentials to privacy by design. One is being proactive, as I talked about, but the other is getting rid of the dated zero-sum model, which is essentially an either-or win-lose model. It's privacy versus security, or privacy versus business interests. It's always put in as one versus the other. And the problem is, it's never privacy that wins over security, nor should it be. But I sure as hell am not going to let it lose out to other interests just because of this dated model. And I've spoken to so many engineers, data scientists, cryptographers to say, can we do this? And I remember Bruce Schneier saying to me, you know, of course we can do it. I love it. Data scientists, they're smart. They're very confident. But they said, he said it's an unnecessary trade-off, this one versus the other thing. That's so yesterday. It's a false dichotomy. And the answer is as simple and as difficult as getting rid of the versus and substituting the and. That's why I call it the power of and. Let me go through very quickly the 7 foundational principles of privacy by design. I've already talked about the need to be proactive in an effort to prevent the harm from arising. Most important, the second foundational principle, privacy as the default setting. And you're going to see this again when we talk about the GDPR in a few minutes. This is a game changer, because what it says is, instead of expecting you, the consumer or data subject, to scour all the legalese and the terms of service and the privacy policy to find the opt-out box that says, do not use my information for any other purpose, forget it. Nobody does that. Nobody has time to do that. Life is short. But that doesn't mean people don't care deeply about privacy. I have never seen concern for privacy as high as it has been in the last 2 years. All of the public opinion polls, Pew Internet Research, etc., are coming in at the 90 percentile consistently in terms of concern for privacy. 91% very concerned about their privacy. 92% very concerned about their total loss of control over their data. It's absolutely essential that you understand how great a concern there is for privacy and what a trust deficit there is. People don't trust companies anymore, organizations. Privacy as a default setting flips that on its head. It says to the consumer, the data subject, you don't have to worry about asking for privacy. We give it to you automatically. It's embedded into our system as the default. You get it no matter what. You don't have to ask for it. What a game changer. What that also does is it builds enormous trust. You build a trusted business relationship with your customers, and that builds loyalty, and it gives you such a competitive advantage. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Embedded into design speaks for itself. If it's embedded seamlessly into your operations, you don't have to worry about bolting it on later or forgetting about it. It's part of an essential component baked into the data architecture, into all of your operations. I've already talked about the importance of positive sum. I cannot emphasize what a difference that makes, and it will help your operations dramatically. Let me talk about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age, if you don't have full security from end to end with full life cycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy, because these days you're dealing with massive cybersecurity attacks on a daily basis. You have to start getting really serious about this. Need I say the Marriott breach that just happened a few days ago that we were aware of? 500 million people all around the world. It's crazy. Visibility and transparency, absolutely critical. You have to let customers, data subjects, have access to their data. First of all, they have a right of access to their own data. But apart from that, it's good for you as a company, because people have told me, businesses, that they gain enormously from having customers have access to their data, because they're the only ones who can point out mistakes. The quality of the information you hold rises dramatically when individuals have access to their data and they can point out the mistakes you have relating to their information. And respect for user privacy, of course, this is essential. If you keep it user-centric, everything falls into place. This is the essence of privacy by design. It always seems like motherhood to me, but I know it's not yet to everyone else, so we're working on that. And just in case you think maybe this sounds good, but it's an academic exercise, it doesn't work on the ground, au contraire. When I was commissioner, everything had to work right then and there. It couldn't be an academic exercise. We partnered with all of the major tech companies. Think of any major tech company: Intel, IBM, HPE, Microsoft, Oracle, and I'm sure I'm leaving out many. And we worked with them in these areas to show how you could use privacy embedded in design and gain multiple benefits. I remember one with Intel, for example, with remote home healthcare. With the demographics of our aging population, a lot of elderly people who still live at home alone and want to stay in their homes alone, but they may need help from time to time. Intel developed these sensors that could be placed, of course, with the consent of the individual, throughout their home. Like you could put a sensor on an individual's bed so that if they got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, but didn't return within a predetermined period of time, the sensor would go off. It would send wirelessly communications, which were encrypted, to the parties you had agreed to, the 3 people beforehand who could receive this information and send help to you, as you had all agreed upon. So it was all consensual, but the data from the sensors, totally protected, encrypted, going to a finite number of people, beautifully done. Privacy by design, really helping out and embedded into the home. And we've had great success with PBD. Japan was an early adopter, and I remember they sent this to me just before I left my last term as commissioner. And I thought, if the Japanese could understand, and they say they insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and they become enlightened with privacy by design, I thought surely the rest of us in English-speaking countries can figure this out and go the direction of positive sum. So I was very excited to hear from JIPDEC, the Japanese Information Processing Development Center. Let me turn to the GDPR, which I know you're all familiar with. It's been in the works for a long time, over 5 years, but it gives control back to the data subject. That's one of the beautiful things about the GDPR. It embeds the notion of control, how important it is, and simplifies a number of regulations. It also just elevates and simplifies, strengthens data protections for people within the EU. But the effect of the GDPR is far-reaching, far beyond the EU, because everyone wants to engage in trade with the EU and trade for business purposes, engage in data exchanges, etc. And you won't be able to do that if you don't have any compliance with the GDPR. One of the other great things I'm excited about, as may not surprise you, is my privacy by design, which is characterized as data protection by design and privacy as the default. It now appears in the GDPR for the first time. It's in there. So for all of you who are working on things, persistence, that's the most important thing. I developed privacy by design in the late 90s. You know, it's been like almost 20 years in the works, but it's now getting its own life. So I'm thrilled. So you just got to keep plodding on whenever you believe in something you're working on. I would not have said this, I want to be clear. This is a quote from Information Age, but I had to show it to you, just to show you that at the end it says, it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. I want to be clear, the GDPR extends far beyond just privacy by design, but I think it goes to show you how strong a presence PBD has in the GDPR, and that may be one of the reasons a lot of companies, like in the US, their laws have never been compliant or essentially equivalent with the EU laws. And now, especially with the GDPR, so a number of companies, what they're doing is they're doing privacy by design, and they've asked me last year to start certifying companies for privacy by design so that they can say, look, to the EU, we're doing privacy by design, we've obtained privacy by design certification from Cavoukian, the creator, and so we'd like you to see we're doing whatever we can on our own to be compliant with the GDPR. Because obviously they can't enact a law on their own. PBD doesn't require a law. It requires that you follow the 7 foundational principles. And as I said, there are many similarities between PBD and the GDPR. You can take a look at this yourself, but this is just a comparison, just to give you an idea of what there is and how it's moving. Our privacy commissioner here in Canada, Ivan Tsarynny, went to the government last year and said, look, we need to upgrade our federal private sector law, PIPEDA, because for the first time, we no longer have adequacy, essential equivalence to the GDPR, which we've always enjoyed in the past. We need to upgrade it. You know, PIPEDA was enacted in the early 2000s, it's dated, and we need to add privacy by design into it. I mean, after all, it was created by one of ours, you know, Cavoukian, a Canadian, so it's crazy that the EU hasn't, we don't have it yet. And the federal government created this document in February in response to the commissioner's comments. And as you'll see, it's entitled Towards Privacy by Design. So that makes me optimistic, thinking that hopefully the Standing Committee on Access to Information Privacy and Ethics has advanced the need to upgrade our law, and I am optimistic that it will be going in that direction. And I mentioned that we have launched the Privacy by Design certification. We're partnering with KPMG, and we're very optimistic that this is really going to move forward. Sylvia Kingsmill, partner at KPMG, has also done a relaunch of our certification to ensure that its upgraded certification seal provides proof of compliance with the GDPR. We've also aligned with ISO, a leading accreditation certification body, as you know, and they will also be including privacy by design in their certification. So things are, moving ahead very promisingly, and I am just very optimistic that things will continue in a good vein. let me make the business case for privacy to you. Because believe it or not, I used to say this even when I was commissioner, privacy is good for business. I used to say, and still do, that you should view privacy primarily as a business issue rather than a compliance issue. Because then you'll think strategically and you'll make privacy, you'll gain a competitive advantage, a business advantage, by viewing it as a business issue. Instead of thinking of it as a negative that you just have to do because it's a law, you make it work for you, and then the benefits are far greater. And I remember once when I did this, someone said, well, what's it going to cost me? And I said, yeah, of course there's going to be some kind of proactive cost up front to doing this, but it will be a fraction of the cost that you will incur when you do have a data breach. Privacy infractions, they're no longer just lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits in response to data breaches. Marriott already has 2 class action lawsuits that were initiated like within days of the data breach being made public. And the damage to your brand and the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. Think of Target. There's no more Target in Canada. The CEO of Target, a few years ago when the major breach happened, he resigned. The president of Target Canada was fired, and then Target left completely. The loss of consumer confidence and trust may be such that you simply can't get it back, so keep that in mind. There are enormous business advantages to embedding privacy proactively by design. And I was so excited. A few years ago, they started the first privacy marketplace at the huge consumer electronics show in Vegas. And I loved it. They said privacy is a hot issue right now. It's on everyone's radar, and consumers are asking about privacy. It's a big takeaway. I loved that. And they said they expect a larger privacy marketplace next year, and for brands to incorporate privacy into their marketing. Everyone can understand the need for privacy. I love that. I do a lot of talking at, for example, the Canadian Marketing Association. They always invite me to speak. And I always start by saying, I'm sure I'm the least popular speaker that you're going to have. And we always have a laugh. And then they say, no, we really want to learn about this stuff because we want to make it work for us, which I always want to help companies do. I always say privacy is not anti-marketing, it's pro-choice. And as I was saying, your reputation, as you know, can just be destroyed in minutes, in seconds. We have to move on this. I mentioned a number of the public opinion polls. I'm not going to spend any time on these. My slides are there for your information, just so you know, and you can then look up the information yourself. There have been so many surveys that have started, and this is continuing. I love referring people to the online privacy law that is unraveling. Professor Joseph Turow from the University of Pennsylvania talked about, he said 91% disagree that if companies give me a discount, it's a fair exchange for them to collect information about me without my knowing it. He said it's not true, and people are increasingly thinking of that. So there's a number of surveys. Our Federal Privacy Commissioner also conducted a survey. 90% of Canadians expressed concern about their privacy, and that continues. So along these veins, I just want you to know that the trends and challenges to consumer confidence are growing, and people want to have, they're looking for companies with what's called good data hygiene, where they're protecting the data and keeping the data safe. And at this point, I just want to turn it over to Ivan for a few minutes, and he's going to speak about a few very important variables.
Thank you, and great having you as well. What we are seeing as a company, and myself as a person, we're definitely seeing increase of influence and how privacy is actually influencing not just purchasing and buying decisions, but also consumer and buyer trust. Privacy, what we're also seeing is privacy is really impacting purchasing decisions more than ever before, and it continues to increase. Looking from a company point of view, for example, imagine from buyers, whether you're a B2B or you're operating in a B2B or B2C sector, you always have as a buyer alternatives. Imagine how it often looks from the purchaser point of view, for example. You're speaking with several suppliers, a couple of vendors, and all of them have great products, but one of them takes really good time to show you all the great things that they've done to embed privacy and help you comply, not just with privacy obligations, but also your customer and consumer expectations. We're also seeing, you will see all the lengths that they've went through to ensure that you don't do just a bare minimum, you do more than bare minimum. And that helps instill trust, helps actually stand out from the alternatives. And considering all the features and similarities from all the other vendors, as a buyer, who would you choose? Who would you likely to choose working with? Everyone else, or the supplier, the vendor that really takes its time to demonstrate what they're going to do around privacy and how they're going to help you comply and differentiate. And also, looking from investments point of view, that's where we are seeing when capital is being deployed into companies, investors, they want to make money, and investors don't want to risk their capital. Privacy is impacting not just purchasing decisions, but ultimately it translates into profitability, market share, growth potential. That's where investors are looking to deploy their capital. And imagine now they're looking at a couple of investment opportunities or companies, and some really stand out and some don't. And where will that capital be deployed? And that's where where privacy risking is also impacting diligence process, investability of companies, and because investors don't want to lose money because of the risk and penalties, they want to help companies grow. And to summarize this topic, the case for business, case for privacy is adequate privacy posture can help with faster growth, can help stand out from your competitors in both sales and buying cycles, and it does lower risk for paying penalties, and ultimately becoming a more attractive organization for both customers, employees, and investors. I think that creates a really, really stronger case for companies to be more attractive on the marketplace from all aspects. I'm kind of going back to Anne.
Great. So Anne, you have control again, and just a quick time check. It's 2:30, so we've got a couple more sections to get through.
Okay, I am going to do my best to speed through these, and I'm just going to give you some big numbers. Look at the billions of records that have been stolen in the past few years. Over 1 billion identities have been stolen, and I'm sure the number is even greater, but here's the big problem. Only 4% of those data breaches were what would be considered secure breaches, where encryption was used and the stolen data was rendered useless. If you do nothing else, encrypt your data at rest. It's so, so vitally important. And millions of dollars in terms of the global average total cost of a breach. Ponemon Institute did this last year, and 3.8 million. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And as you know, there have been an epidemic of breaches. I'm going to go very quickly because I think I have like 5 minutes, if that. So I'm going to go very quickly. You have these available to you, these slides, and it'll just give you an idea of what takes place. And just to be very clear, almost 90% of the respondents said that they knew of a company who had experienced a data breach because of an inside threat. They find that insiders are the cause of problems. I don't mean just in terms of like rogue employees, but poor management practices, information being just lying around, not being taken care of. And of course, data breaches continue. We should add Marriott at the end of this because it's one of the largest ones so far. And here's some of the things about the data breach relating to Marriott. And already, this has had an impact on their shares, and this just continues. But one of the consequences of this is identity theft, huge, fastest growing form of consumer fraud. You are going to have such a hard time clearing your name, convincing companies that I didn't rack up those charges. Someone had access to my credit card information or other information. Just a horror. I worked with a lot of this people who suffered identity theft when I was a privacy commissioner, and it's just a nightmare. I always find that boards of directors want to understand what is the risk to their company, along with the plans for how you would handle that risk and reduce the impact. So that's one of the important proactive things you can do up front. And it's really, really important to do that. One of the best ways, data minimization. I always tell people up front, when you're When you've completed using the data in personally identifiable form, that you collected it for the primary purpose of the data collection, de-identify it, anonymize the data, aggregate it, use encryption techniques, do whatever you need to do, but de-identification is critical because once the data are rendered non-identifiable, you no longer have any concerns in terms of privacy. You free the data to be used for purposes of data utility, data research, whatever. It's absolutely essential. And you can do this using very strong de-identification protocols combined with a risk of re-identification framework. Khaled El-Imam, who's a professor at the University of Ottawa, is world-renowned for his methodology in de-identifying data. His de-identification efforts have survived all re-identification attacks. And believe me, everybody wants to attack Khaled's work because he is exemplary and they want to make a name for themselves, and they just never succeed. But I want to also make it clear, well, people say, well, you can never eliminate all risk. Of course not. I talk about the myth of zero risk. There's no such thing as zero risk anywhere in the world. You know, you send your kids to school, you tell them to look both ways before they cross the street. Unfortunately, things happen. All you can do is minimize the risk dramatically, and we can do that. Khaled minimizes the risk of re-identification to less than 0.05%, which is less than the odds of being hit by lightning if you go out when it's raining. Very, very good odds. And there are many standards. I've outlined 5 of these that take a risk-based approach. So please take a look at these. You can do this. One of the important things I always advise people, I say, do you have a data map? And they look at me and I say, do you know how personal data flows throughout your organization after it's been used for the primary purpose of the data collection? Because theoretically, it's not supposed to be used for any other purposes unless you have additional consent from the data subject. So once you have a map as to how the information may flow throughout your organization, you can navigate any potential impacts in terms of unauthorized access, or you need to get additional consent here. You have to have a risk mitigation strategy. It's really, really important. Also, privacy impact assessments, of course, I consider these to be a very important analytical process, and they will help you to identify the risks and address them again and again. And of course, you need a data breach response. Most people don't have this. Most companies, they don't have a data breach protocol in place. And this should kick in the minute you have a data breach so that all your staff are trained on what to do, how to notify individuals who have been the subject of a breach. As you know, there's now a data breach requirement federally. In Ontario, if you're dealing with health information under PHIPAA, Personal Health Information Protection Act, it's mandatory breach notification. So you have to know exactly what to do and when to do it. You've got to be prepared right away. Okay, I'm going to go really quickly. Believe it or not, I didn't say this. I was delighted that people thought that privacy by design is a starting point that leads to long-term benefits. It was actually Jessica Kernan of Advertising Age. She was at one of my talks, and she said, by adopting privacy by design mentality, we can transform ideas like these into best practices that have long-term benefits for both consumers and brands. That's the key point. So she actually summarized a number of my comments, and I wanted to make that available to you, the key takeaways from my talk to the Canadian Marketing Association. These were points that they actually summarized from my talk, so I thought that was excellent. Let me end, ladies and gentlemen, by just talking about the importance of minimizing risk, always. And you can do this best, both in terms of privacy and security, by proactively embedding privacy into the design of your operations. Upfront, focus on prevention, much more cost-effective, and it will not only lead to more ethical treatment of personal data, but it will give you a competitive advantage, and you will gain the loyalty and the trust of your customers and your data subjects. Please get rid of zero-sum thinking. If you take away nothing else from this, get rid of the either-or mentality and substitute and. You can do this again and again, and by doing so, you will avoid what we call privacy by disaster, which is when you actually do have a data breach and then you've got the regulator knocking on the door, and that's the last thing you want. So thank you very much for your time. Let me turn it over to Ivan now.
Great, and Anne, thank you. That's everyone, that's Anne's contact information. And Anne, right before we jump into Ivan's part, he's gonna explain how to really integrate this into your operations, we had a good question that I thought we should address right now, and then we're going to do it at the end. So someone was wondering your thoughts specifically on giving individuals the option to opt out from all marketing, including from personalization of services. How do businesses handle this kind of thing?
You know, the only problem with that, yes, you can get people to opt out of all marketing. Again, though, very few people end up using the opt-out provision because it's a form of negative consent. It requires people to find the opt-out box and engage in that, and it's not going to be used very effectively. So the question might be, what happens if we actually do privacy as the default, which means they don't have to opt out, they would automatically be opted out, if you will. Their information could only be used for the primary purpose obtained. What does that do for marketing? What you will have to do if in that scenario is attract the interest of your customers. Explain to them why they would benefit from allowing you to send them marketing ads or whatever they're interested in. You have to engage your customers. And you see, with due respect, marketing has had a free ride thus far because they haven't had to do that. They just send out information to everybody, people want it or not, and they end up deleting a lot of it, but it takes a lot of time. And again, it gets a lot of animosity. People get really upset with all this marketing stuff they're getting. So I don't think it really benefits marketing. It would be far preferable to engage customers and send them the marketing that they're interested in. I'm interested in getting lots of marketing things that relate to my areas of interest and my, personal shopping habits. I always tell people, I love shoes. There it is. It's out there. So I love getting anything that, there's a shoe sale here, or there's this or that. But you have to get the people engaged in the marketing. So that will be my proposal to your companies is engage your customers, build a trusted business relationship, and then you will get them consenting to far more than you ever imagined.
Okay, that's fantastic, Anne. Thank you. I'm sure that helped a lot of people. So we're going to jump into Ivan's section, which will take about 10 minutes, and then we're going to address your challenges specifically. So keep listening. Ivan?
Yes, thank you, Lori. I'll just jump right into it. The reality of today's business models is it's a digital world. And data-driven economies data-driven economy is forcing companies to rapidly innovate the way they operate and do business today. New technologies have never seen faster adoption than ever before. Customer expectations are always changing, and they've never changed as rapidly as they're changing now. Buying and selling processes, customer service, HR, supply lines have never been as data-driven as they are today. Today's privacy, however, operating model was conceived in most cases during the era of the fax machines and paper records, and was simply continually updated in a kind of shoestring approach with the new requirements to adapt to marketing, to adapt to customer service, customer success, HR needs, and so on. Often, what we notice is if an organization has more than 20 applications, they are very likely facing siloed privacy management on a day-to-day basis. Essentially breaking down the data silos to consolidate the privacy governance, operations, accountability, and reporting is highly, highly recommended to not just stay compliant, but also become more competitive. And privacy does not equal silos of data. It's actually equals transparency and comprehensive view and comprehensive control. For example, Anne mentioned about GDPR. What we are also noticed is even in the change from 2018, from 2017 to 2018 is last year, most people could not even really spell GDPR, where today almost everyone knows what GDPR is, and also is aware about the upcoming regulatory changes, whether it's CCPA in California. There are rumors about the new federal privacy law in the US and upcoming changes in PIPEDA in Canada. So, for example, under GDPR, organizations often wear multiple hats, whether you're a controller, joint controller, or processor, and each role comes with responsibilities. And companies are not really interested to understand, and they're interested to understand what concerns each of them comes in. And the GDPR is actually a much broader thing than fulfilling certain rights. And that's actually, privacy is much broader than just GDPR or a particular law that you need to comply. Whether it's, so coming back to GDPR, whether it's fulfilling data subject rights, access rights, record keeping obligations under Article 30, safeguards, and on. There's significant changes that companies need to realize what they need to do from consumer or front end facing, consumer employee facing point of view, or from the back office. Second thing is, imagine you're a data controller or you're a data processor and you have a new customer. Bob is a new customer, and now your company has an obligations around how that data is being processed, how the data is being governed in the AI systems, machine learning systems, or when it's being shared with third-party systems. And you need to be asking yourself under Article 7, 12 to 23 the questions: how would Bob withdraw consent as easily as he gave it? How can Bob request data erasure if it is applicable? How can he request restrictions of processing, rectification, data exports? Or how can you deny and say no to access request and defend it? And so on. So there's comprehensive requirements that companies need to reconsider moving forward, whether it's under GDPR or other obligations. So coming down to fulfilling actually access rights and facilitating obligations when it comes down to privacy operations. It's very time consuming. It's extensive process. There's a lot of garbage in and garbage out happening on daily basis when you need to deal with this kind of things, like for example, fulfilling access requests or fulfilling a privacy request or erasure request or Article 30 obligations of record keeping. The manual process is just where you need to conduct interviews, assessments, phone calls, and emails. It's time consuming and they're typically error prone. So consider automating it down. That's one of the trends that we're noticing in 2018 moving into 2019 is automation of privacy operations. So, and why automation or why privacy ops is becoming a new model or a new requirements? And what is privacy operations, privacy ops in short? It is a new functional group and an emerging department within organizations. In many cases, it's not officially called privacy operations yet. And but that department has a full range of privacy operations across marketing, sales, analytics, services, HR, back office operations, customer service, and so on. Privacy ops unifies data governance operation across all operational silos and operational areas within the organization, whether it's coming from privacy or access governance for on-premise and third-party processing activities. Also, Privacy Ops has one primary objective. It's pretty much squared on transforming organizations' perspective away from risk avoidance and towards opportunity seeking and competitive differentiation. So how does the success look like when it comes to Privacy Ops? It is individuals can intuitively and easily exercise their rights. Companies have user-centric privacy experience. Privacy and access controls are part of the technology solutions that they operate. Fulfilling privacy and access obligations is a routine and automated activity. Privacy and access control systems detect, predict, and report non-compliant events even before they happen or can predict it. Privacy access natively operates across all departmental and inter-organizational boundaries departments without real data silos in place. Also, organizations are always prepared to demonstrate proof of privacy and access compliance to any third party or regulators that need to take a look. Okay, so one key area, again, I want to emphasize what also Anne mentioned is risk avoidance. Risk avoidance under privacy is just a starting point. It's about building trust and loyalty with customers. It comes around harmonizing and aligning an organization, ensuring that privacy initiatives have measurable business impact, when an organization is aligned, it generates more revenue, it reduces costs, it brings new data-driven products to market quicker and faster. Customer-focused products and services changes are coming into, being embedded into operations. Removing overhead helps focus operations on key objectives. So privacy ops allows marketing, sales, customer success service, HR, and other organizations do what really matters, and not try to comply with various obligations. So privacy operations takes care of that as well. And planning and operations, it works with the concept of accountability, careful planning, implementation of privacy ops, controls across all departmental and organizational boundaries, whether it's a global enterprise, mid-sized company, or government organization, or a franchise-based organization. So now we're jumping into specific steps that we notice some of the best organizations are already taking, and how they're embedding privacy operations into their operations and into their competitive advantage drivers. So step one, it actually starts with culture and stakeholder alignment. Aligning your team around documented privacy goals that are aligned to business goals is critical, because no stakeholder alignment equals no results and no cohesion. What we always recommend is have a stakeholder alignment meeting, bring every stakeholder on the page and get a strong buy-in, and that is tied not to just compliance, but to business objectives and business goals. Next is data mapping. Knowing what you have, because like the quote goes, you can't manage what you can't measure. And data mapping, like Anne mentioned, is the first critical element in organizational privacy compliance process. Second is, the challenge is actually in data mapping is keeping it accurate. We always recommend considering finding what are the problems in keeping data map accurate and up to date, and make it actionable. So it drives activities, whether it's across third-party applications or your on-prem applications. Privacy UX is it's a big first major change that we're noticing is where digital companies with digital business models, they are really reconsidering what they need to be doing in terms of embedding privacy user experience, making it intuitive, making it easy, and making it part of the day-to-day operations. Next, one of the biggest areas that is emerging as a risk issue is third parties. And third parties and sub-processor vendor management is becoming a challenge to more and more organizations. Data controllers are required to ensure that their vendors and processors properly handle all personal data shared with them. And many companies realize that first, their impression is we might have a couple of dozen third-party systems, and then once they go through the discovery process, they find that they have hundreds, if not thousands. Like in a marketing tech stack, or HR tech stack, or sales tech stack, data is being passed between CRM systems to marketing automation systems, newsletters, customer service systems that are processing data across the world in various areas and geographies, and that is a big kind of siloed and area that is not being governed properly. And finally, it's getting started. With a vision without execution plan is just a dream. And the secret of getting started is actually getting started. Privacy ops can start in two ways: distributed capabilities through your team, or specialize. And with that, what I want to wrap up is to summarize what I just shared, and our learnings were that it is a new organizational model. It increases competitive advantage and regulatory compliance through measurable improvements of operational effectiveness. And most importantly, it's actually helping companies do new things that make you different, make you stand out, and change actually the value chain in most cases. So Privacy Ops, to summarize, unifies all key silos of privacy access management across information silos such as customer information, medical records, employee data, back office operations, and other organizational silos. We noticed that in most cases, when companies needs to comply with, for example, GDPR, over 80% of the data that needs to be brought into compliance is actually around HR and their employees, not just about the customers. And it comes to recruitment, employee engagement, employee performance management, and other areas. And privacy operations, PrivacyOps provides harmonized, simplified, and aligned way to focus on what really matters for the company and the business goals.
Great. Thank you, Ivan. You can follow Ivan on Twitter or on LinkedIn, or email him for more questions about anything you just saw. But what we want to do is jump into those challenges. And we've got 10 minutes left to quickly address this specifically and some questions that have been coming in. So let's jump into it. So Anne, this is for you again. This came up a lot when everyone filled in what their number one challenge was the awareness across the organization is all over the place. So Anne, what do you recommend as a best practice here to make sure everyone's on the same page?
You know, if at all possible, of course, you want to get the CEO's attention, the senior executives. And how do you do that? That's always the question. I find whenever there's a massive data breach, that's a great time to try to get the attention of the senior executives, the management team, whoever is running the shop at a very high level. Because what you want to convey to them is we have to get rid of the silos. That's one of the biggest problems, is you have to get rid of the silos so everyone can be talking to each other. The policy talks to legal, talks to the tech group, and then you can take a coordinated approach to addressing the problems. Whenever I talk to engineers, data scientists, etc., and I say to them, how come you're not embedding privacy into the programming you're doing? They say, look, don't yell at us. I'm not yelling at them, but don't talk to us, talk to them, them being the senior executives, the management. They say, because we get the instructions to write the code for a program. Rarely included in that is, build in a privacy solution. So we don't build in for privacy. We deliver the program, and then somebody says to us, can you bolt on a privacy solution after the fact? And they said, look, give me a break. We'll do our best, but it's never going to be as good as if it was seamlessly embedded into the process right from the outset. So you have to get the attention of the senior executives, and I know that can be challenging, but as I said, when there's a massive data breach, that gets their attention right away because it affects business, there's class action lawsuits, it's very costly. So that's an ideal time to see if you can speak to them and say, look, we have to take a coordinated approach to this. We have to be upfront, embed privacy into all of our operations, and do it in a seamless way so that we can avoid these pitfalls and the harms from arising. And if that fails, invite me to speak to your company and I will always get them on board.
So bring Anne in, basically. Okay, so this was another very common theme that came up in everyone's answers, was the risks are really decentralized with the data everywhere, or sometimes even hidden, some of the controls. Ivan, maybe you can answer to this with PrivacyOps. How do you improve visibility into what's happening over all your applications, third parties, and everything?
Yeah, thank you. It's again, what we're seeing is a continuous increase of data distribution across applications, whether it's across traditional SaaS or cloud apps, or the new emerging area of AI and machine learning based applications. So the key problem to solve first is an accurate data inventory, data registry, and knowing who's touching what data for what purpose, what's the legal basis for processing that data. And like Ken mentioned earlier, data minimization. Does that vendor, does that application actually need that data for the original purpose of it being collected? And second is making it actionable. So it's good that you know your vendors or your applications. And next step is knowing what data is being passed to them and what are the retention policies. What are the data lifecycle management processes are. So when somebody, when the data was submitted and it now needs to be deleted, how do you actually do it? And if your data is being processed across multiple jurisdictions, whether it's provincial, state, or national borders, so whether it's being processed in Europe, within a European Economic Area or Canada, how do you actually control it on a day-to-day basis? How do you prove that, and how do you have a proof that you've done what you're supposed to be doing? So that's a really critical step, especially for large organizations, as we've noticed many banks have not hundreds, but thousands, a couple thousand third-party applications that is processing their data. And that's a really critical step.
That sounds very complex, but it sounds like data mapping is really key to that. So maybe we'll do another webinar just on that. This was the third major theme across all your challenges, the competing priorities. So getting that initial buy-in. We went over what some of the business cases were, but Anne, what would you say to this last one in a minute or two, so we can take some other questions? How can they go talk to their execs and say, hey, listen, this is just as important as our revenue goals?
What I would point out to them is the mistakes made by other companies that are experiencing massive data breaches now, like Equifax, Marriott. There are so many. And I would point to them and say, these companies completely underestimated the risks associated with privacy and security. They just used very little in terms of available resources for those areas, and it's just come back to haunt them. And that's what you have to point out, that we have to get in front of the program. Forget that there's no budget. Is there a budget for costly data breaches after the fact? It's going to cost you, it's going into the millions these days, and it's not an exaggeration. So it's absurd to say, well, there's no budget for it. Well, then figure out a way to budget for it so that you don't have to pay after the fact. It's much better to get in front of it. And the cost up front is a fraction. It's tiny compared to the cost you will definitely incur when you have a security problem, a data breach. And I guarantee you will have one, because they're just everywhere and they're happening on a daily basis. So that's the, unfortunately, you have to use the, that's the stick to say that if we don't do it, we are going to incur far greater costs after the fact. And we may lose the value of our brand, our reputation may suffer, our customers may leave, their loyalty gone out the window, their business. I mean, it's just, I can convince anyone, give me 5 minutes. So those are the kind of messages you have to convey. And I believe me, I've spoken to hundreds of companies about this who are completely resistant at the beginning of the talk, but because they're not aware of what the costs are afterwards that they're going to incur in the absence of this kind of education and certification.
Absolutely. And I think Ivan just wants to pitch in one last thought.
And I just want to add 10 seconds to that. It's also, privacy is now being often linked to fiduciary duties of directors and officers, of senior executives and of the corporation.
Yes.
So it's really topical for them, especially in the eyes of what happened to Equifax executive team and what might happen to Marriott.
Yeah, so it can be personally liable. So listen, we had hundreds of questions come in. We're going to try to get back to you personally, and if you have more specific questions, just email us at questions@Feroot, and we've got a bunch of experts in our community that we can direct these questions to, including, of course, Dr. Anne Cavoukian. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us, especially Anne. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And I have some announcements to make. And of course, we will be sending you this recording. I think, Ivan, you have an announcement?
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Anne, and everyone on this webinar. Part of the PrivacyOps framework that we've been working on over the last, this year, we're going to be releasing it actually publicly as a contribution to the Standards Council and other bodies that we're part of. And we'll be happy to share it with everyone on this webinar as well.
Yeah, for sure. And stay tuned. This is just the first of our expert webinar series. So we'll be doing one in 2019 on best practices on all of this stuff. Transparency notices, consent, data mapping, everything. So again, thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you, Anne. Once again, you're amazing. And
my pleasure.
Okay, keep sending questions. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.